Live. Well, today you guys are starting. You don't look at the camera. I was just saying I wanted to be able to see some of you. Go. You're on.
All right. So the extract that we're going to analyze is located in the beginning of the play. It is at page 120, and it is located right after Edmund betrays his brother Edgar and Gloucester. So in this extract, both characters, so Gloucester and Edmund, they share their vision on fatality and what caused the tragic events that happened throughout the kingdom. So the extract starts by Gloucester reflecting on recent events which he believes were caused by nature reacting against man's action. So on the second line, he says, though the wisdom of nature can reason thus and thus, yet nature finds itself scourged by the sequent effects. He brings schools of nature and the recent tragedies that happened, and we can say that he believes that as man started to act unnaturally, this provoked nature, and therefore nature started acting unnaturally. So this is quite an odd affirmation, but this strangeness can be confirmed by Gloucester's words at the end when he says, strange, strange. So during the whole extract, the tone is quite dark, and that can reveal that Gloucester is really worried about the events. Adding to that, the enumeration at line 104, which says, love cools, friendship falls off, brothers divide, in cities mutinies, in countries discords, palaces treason, the bond cracked between son and father. So this enumeration gives the impression that this significant decline is everlasting, that it is a fall of despair and there's no hope for the future. And also we can notice that all of these short sentences, they refer or foreshadow events in the play. For example, when he says palaces treason, so this obviously foreshadows Goneril and Regan backstabbing their own king. Also, we can understand realistically Gloucester's opinion on the recent events, so he believes that nature caused them, as he is one of the only characters in the play who is innocent, who didn't voluntarily do bad things. So everything is happening upon him, and he has no control over them.
Right, so then Edmund's part begins, and Edmund is opposed to Gloucester in that he does not actually believe in fatality. So Edmund believes that man causes his own problems. So we can see this when he continues Gloucester's metaphor of the astral on line 12. He says, we make guilty of our disasters the sun, the moon, and the stars, as if we were villains by necessity. This is a metaphor, and it's also a hyperbole because he's comparing what's happening to man to the sun and the moon and the stars. He's saying that they are responsible, which is obviously an exaggeration because these are the ultimate things that you can compare air to. But it's also obvious that he's beginning to state that it's kind of a laughable idea, that it's a bit ridiculous to believe that man does not cause his own problems. Starting at line 118, he says, an admirable evasion of whoremaster man to lay his goatish disposition to the charge of stars, which is an oxymoron because admirable evasion are opposed because it's not admirable to avoid taking responsibility for your own actions and saying that you are the one who causes these things. I think so. That's an oxymoron, and again it's indicating the ridiculousness, and you'll see that it's a repetitive theme with Edmund that he's kind of mocking this, and it's tone that he's going to be using throughout. And to reinforce this tone, we have the idea of irony, starting at line 120, and he says, my father compounded with my mother under the dragon's tail, and my nativity was under Ursa Major, so that it follows I am rough and lecherous. By this, he's obviously saying something that is to the opposite of what he believes, as we saw throughout the rest of it, which is a use of irony, and he's completing the mockery and kind of showing the extreme of the logic that you have to go to and how absurd it can be. So now's a good time to mention that Edmund's idea that fatality isn't what causes the deaths. it can be related to the end of the play when Edgar finally kills Edmund, because Edgar kills Edmund for having betrayed him with Gloucester, so it's a sort of revenge, and therefore it means that Edmund kind of caused his own death by going through with this revenge and failing with it in the end because Edgar survives, and therefore Edmund brings his own death upon himself, which can actually be seen in this very extract through a form of foreshadowing. When Edmund, upon Edgar's entrance, Edmund says of Edgar, like the catastrophe of old comedy. The catastrophe of old comedy being kind of the deus ex machina that comes in and ends the old comedies, but especially using the word catastrophe indicates that Edgar is going to be a catastrophe for Edmund. He's going to be the death of him. So in conclusion, we can see in this passage the opposition between Gloucester and Edmund throughout, specifically, their difference of tone, where Edmund is kind of mocking Gloucester's ideas. So we can contrast this to the context of the modern world, where back in Shakespearean days, people would kind of believe in these astrology things. So they kind of agree with Gloucester, and Edmund is kind of Shakespeare's way of mocking this through his eyes. And today we tend to agree more with Edmund, because when there are still people who believe in astrological signs, it's much less common nowadays. It was in the olden days when these kinds of superstitions were adhered to more strongly.
So the extract we had was scene 7, pages 173 to 176. The scene is right after Ken is imprisoned after he had a feud with Oswald, and the king asks for his freedom. Right after that, the king asks Goneril for shelter since Regan had refused it earlier, shelter for him and his 100 knights. The king has already relinquished his power and can no longer sway things in his favor since he lost all the leverage he had by birthright, by giving away his title. Thomas and I will analyze the diplomacy he uses, the power relations between Lear and his daughters, the theme of family, and the theme of nature in this extract.
In our extract, the theme of family is synthesized through the speech of King Lear and his daughters, as they each reveal their views concerning what family stands for. As Goneril and Regan attempt to convince Lear to get rid of his men, they often use rhetorical questions, such as at line 419 to 421. What need you 5 and 20, 10 or 5 to follow in a house where twice so many have a command to tend you? These rhetorical questions are closely linked to the theme of human nature as well as family. As we must understand that the daughters are lying about their intentions for their own purpose, which is a violation of the normal or accepted concept of family. It thus follows that Lear is starting to question his daughter's intentions in this passage. At line 409, he says, "Made you my guardians, my depositaries." These words are strongly connotated and thereby express his expectations and his unhappiness about their attitude. He is in fact holding on to the idea that family members should be loyal to one another, which demonstrates his poor grasp of family, especially in the feudal context. We can also see this poor grasp of family at line 417 to 18. Thy 50 at doth double 5 and 20, and thou art twice her love. He is literally quantifying love and comparing it to how much power his daughters are willing to let him have. In the end, the theme of family is an essential part of the play. It defines how the characters see one another. This is true for Lear and his daughters, but also for Gloucester and his sons. Shakespeare seems to be questioning the truth behind the moral value of family, and this is especially true as we see Edmund's plot against his father and brother develop to treason. Finally, this extract represents an important part of the play, which is a conflict of moral against self-interest. On the same note, nature and human nature are crucial to understanding the interactions of King Lear and his daughters. These themes are mostly expressed in Lear's speech. In this passage, Lear is often confusing comparing human nature with nature itself. Lines 400 and 427 show this particularly well. Man's life is as cheap as bees, thou art a lady, if only to go warm or gorgeous, why nature needs not what thou gorgeous wearest, which scarcely keeps thee warm. With this metaphor, he compares his daughters to vanity and to their human nature, to their nature as beasts. He is also very humble about himself, as he later says, "You see me here, you gods, a poor old fellow." This concept is very Hobbesian. This vision sees the ruler as transcending human nature and above laws of nature itself. He goes in further calling them unnatural hags. It's another metaphor which puts emphasis on the daughters' inhumanity, since the term hags essentially refers to the Anglo-Saxon concept of witches. Finally, these themes can be witnessed in other parts of the play. King Lear puts emphasis on the nature of rulers, but also delves deeply into the nature of certain characters, which greatly contrast one another. Edmund's treachery is mirrored by Edgar's valiant heart. Some, like Kent, are fiercely loyal and Stephanus, while others, like Cornwall, do not hesitate to resort to cruel actions to pursue their own goals.
So, to link back to the theme of family, Lear uses diplomacy to further his interhuman relations. In this extract, he tries to use it before becoming fully angry against his daughters. He mentions some sort of contract he had with the now queens before giving them his power at line 409. Made you my guardian, my depository, but kept a reservation to be followed with such a number. What must I come to you with 5 and 20? Regan said you so. He is outraged by the fact that that Regan does not honor her contract with him that they had agreed upon when he split the land between his daughters. I mean, Regan and Goneril both, actually. And so, he has the right to bring his 100 knights, but then both of them ask him to get rid of half of his knights, 50, and then of 3/4, 25, and then all of them. So they even ask him, what need you of 5 and 20, 10 or 5 to follow in a house where twice as many have a command to tend you? Goneril thinks that Lear does not need a personal levy since they act their own. However, you may link this to modern politics, where diplomatic envoys can and do bring their own police staff to, let's say, the Olympics, to link back to today's world. Because otherwise they would be at the mercy of their host. So speaking of mercy, the power relations between the characters are also something very notable in this extract. The sisters doubt that 2 different levies can hold amity. At the beginning of page 174, how in a house should many people under 2 commands hold amity? 'Tis hard, almost impossible. They would like the king to dismiss his own levy, therefore the king would be at their mercy. But we see that later in the play that both queens plot against the king, so he really would have probably perished if he had not refused of dismissing his men. The king, in asking shelter, is at a disadvantage. Regan and Goneril hold all the leverage, and the king does not hold either military or diplomatic power to enforce his demands. His daughters have not honored their treaty, and the king has no way to make them behave.
To conclude, we saw the themes of power relationships, diplomacy, family nature, and human nature are defined in our portion of King Lear. It is important to keep in mind that while it is convenient to fragment Shakespeare's writing to give us a better understanding of the meaning of the text, our social and cultural context is entirely different than that of the author's time. Since all these themes are intemporal, it should be said that one of the dangers of interpreting text from another time is to apply our contextual knowledge and give a different sense to the original intention. However, we can fairly say that in many ways these concepts are still relatable, and we can gain some wisdom from revisiting them. For example, the concept of family, even if King Lear represents us aristocratic families, could be linked to modern-day families. As Marx and Engels said in the Communist Manifesto, the capitalist system reduces bourgeois families to monetary relations. Perhaps we ought to be reminded that, just like Lear and Gloucester, giving our absolute trust to someone based on his status is rarely a good idea.
So our extract comes from scene 11. It's after Lear's expulsion from Gloucester's castle, where he braves outside the storm with Kent and the fool. He then Kent finds a shelter for them in a cave, in which they find Edgar, who was running away from Gloucester. and he has disguised himself as Poor Tom. In this extract, we will try to find out about the symbolism of many different words and the theme of nature, the manners of Lear, and also we will dig up some literary devices.
You should dig them up.
I love it.
So the first and most obvious literary device is foreshadowing. And foreshadowing is used commonly in tragedies, and it's no exception for Shakespeare. For example, he uses it in other plays such as Romeo and Juliet, where they predict the couple's death right at the start or in the middle. And so the purpose of foreshadowing is to show that the end is not the important part of the story, but the journey itself. So the journey itself, it shows that the downfall of the character and how the character loses everything. And this is amplified through the effect of catharsis. And so the catharsis is the effect where the spectators project their emotions onto the characters in order to release their own emotional tension. And so in this extract, Tom's first monologue, he says, "The foul fiend had led through fire and through flame, through ford and whirlpool over bog and quagmire, that had laid knives under his pillow and halters in his pew, set ratsbane by his porch." So in this passage, it's a series of foreshadowing for the rest of the play, and it kind of shows all the events that are going to happen later on. And first of all, we have to see the foul fiend not as the devil himself, but more as an entity of evil to better understand the foreshadowing. So in line 48, there's the word halters, which roughly translates to noose, which is what you use to hang yourself, to commit suicide in a way. So this is a foreshadow of Gloucester's attempt at suicide, where the devil pushes him off the cliff. And it's also a foreshadowing of Goneril's suicide, since she's somewhat the incarnation of the entity of evil itself. And in line 49, there's the words ratsbane, which translates to rat poison, and this is a foreshadowing of Regan, who dies to Goneril's poison later on. And in line 51, there's the phrase which says, "Bless thy 5 wits," which roughly translates to "cherish your 5 senses," which can be a foreshadowing of Gloucester losing his eyesight. And later on, Tom says his advice. He tells Lear some advice and how to live life at line 74, and he says, "Commit not with men's sworn spouse," and this can be a foreshadowing of Goneril committing adultery with Edmund, and Edmund gladly accepting Goneril as his mistress. And so the second most important part of this extract is the symbolism of the hawthorn. So the hawthorn in Celtic mythology is the symbol of duality and the balance in duality. And to summarize it, it's kind of a harmony between two opposing entities. And so the extract starts with, "Through the sharp hawthorn blows the cold wind," and also ends with the word hawthorn. The cold wind blows against the hawthorn. And so the opposing entities in this is insanity and sanity, and man versus nature. So first of all, insanity versus insanity, there is a certain harmony between Edgar in his persona, because he is able to switch between the personality of Edgar as a nobleman and his alter ego as Tom, who is a madman and who's poor. And there's also a certain level of harmony between the Fool and Lear, which is shown in the previous scenes, and it's shown through their intimacy, despite the fact that they are two completely opposing characters in personality, psychology, and the way that they act and look and see the world. And there's also like the switching of roles between Lear and the Fool and Edgar. So we see that in this extract, Lear becomes more and more insane, and that the Fool and Edgar, who is acting insane, becomes more wise than the king. So this duality is shown really well.
While following the symbolism of duality of the hawthorn, we also have an opposition between nature and society, where in the last part of the extract, poor Tom's naked body is laying in front of the 3 other characters, the King Lear, the Fool, and Kent. those three are all dressed properly, while Tom only has a blanket to cover himself. And prior to this scene, and before our extract starts, Lear has been mostly, he was getting mad, so he started getting obsessed with nature. So at the end he says, at line 98, off you landings, come on, be true. And so he strips himself to be with poor Tom, who is a representation of human at its primal state, its natural state. This scene also marks the descent of Lear into madness, because in the play, all along before this scene, Lear was talking in verse, and now he has switched prose after meeting Edgar, which can mark his, the start of his understanding of human nature. Yeah, so he inherited the peasant's language. Another duality is between man and animal, mostly with Edgar. Edgar himself compares himself to animals to convey his sins. In lines 83, he says, hog and sloth, fox and stealth, wolf and greediness, dog and madness, and lion and prey. So for every animal, he's saying each animal represents one of the sins he has committed. And also Lear puts in contrast the nakedness of a human being and versus the animals one, where the animals actually have some kind of speciality that protect them from nature. Naked humans are vulnerable. And there's however a form of harmony between these two, because they are not in debt of each other, as Lear says in line 93, thou owest the worm no silk, the beast no hide, the sheep no wool, the cat no perfume. So they are not, unlike in society, where humans have forsaken the rights of animals. The other mention of animals is kind of a reverse personification of Lear's daughters in line 68, where he calls them those pelican daughters. Pelican babies are long thought to be feeding off their parents' blood, just like how Regan and Goneril are chipping away at Lear's authority, his kingdom. And just like those pelicans, the parents they're offering their blood to their children, and their children are not fighting for it in a way. Just like how Lear is just giving away his kingdom.
So in conclusion, almost everything that Tom says in this extract can be seen as a foreshadowing of the events that are going to happen in the rest of the play. And the theme of duality can be seen in other parts of the play, such as the duality between Goneril and his husband Albany, and also the duality between Cordelia and her sisters, in a way that they're both daughters of the same father, but they have completely opposing personas and personalities.
Go ahead, guys. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to stall you, but I'm just busy. Go.
Okay. So our passage is actually the entire scene 17 minus 2 lines, so this is good. So let's contextualize this a bit. Right before our scene, Gloucester is tortured at the hands of Regan and Cornwall, while Lear and the disguised Kents are headed for Dover. And this is scene 17 is the first time that the scene is set in Dover. And Albany and Cornwall's troops are also headed for Dover because France is invading from this city. So in this scene, Kent and the gentleman are talking, but this scene is not about those two characters. This scene is actually about Cordelia and King Lear. And this scene precedes an eventual meeting between those two people. And in this scene, Kent is asking the gentleman how Cordelia felt when she learned what happened to King Lear. So basically in the scene, the gentleman is describing Cordelia's feelings toward King Lear, while Kent is describing King Lear's feeling toward Cordelia. And in this scene symbolizes forgiveness given by Cordelia to Lear through the themes of pity and religion. So let's talk about pity. So this scene is divided in two parts. In the first part, there's a description of Cordelia's feelings. Cordelia, despite the actions of Lear, who rewarded greed and punished true love, does not feel any satisfaction when she learns that Lear has fallen, she does not have any revengeful thoughts. In fact, she is aggrieved by her father's condition. This is suggested in line 13 of the scene where it says that an ample tear is trilled down her delicate cheek. And she's also angry at her sisters who not only put King Lear in this situation, but are also being joyful about seeing him suffer. The second half is a description of Lear's feelings through the mouth of Kent. Kent describes Lear as being poor and distressed, and this alludes obviously to him having lost everything, basically doesn't have him basically not having any authority anymore because he lost all his knights and being rejected by both Goneril and Regan. And and not only that, but the king is also described as being afflicted by a sovereign shame. This is on line 43 of the scene. This shame is alluding to the guilt that he feels because he did not know what was right and what was wrong at a specific moment, and he gave what was rightfully Cordelia's to her sisters who are heartless and who are ungrateful. And there's a conflict within Lear that remains, even though there is no more storm. King Lear wants to seek forgiveness from Cordelia, but at the same time he feels so shameful, so guilty about what he did that he does not have the courage to approach Cordelia. And if you put those two halves together, Cordelia's feelings and King Lear's feelings, what we learn is that Cordelia's sorrow finds its roots in pity for her father, and this pity is the first step toward forgiveness. Furthermore, this passage echoes the first scene in which the daughters are expressing their love toward their father to get a part of the kingdom, and Cordelia, who is not as skilled as her sisters in expressing her feelings, is seeking forgiveness from Lear because he misinterpreted her words and decided to banish her. And now Lear, realizing the wrong he did, is the one seeking forgiveness from Cordelia. So there's a clear reversal of roles there. It's kind of ironic. And now Cordelia is now a powerful queen ruling over France, and the king is basically running for his safety. And Cordelia, instead of punishing him like Lear did, she decides to forgive him. And this pity, which comes from a purity, is not only an expression of true love, but also an act of forgiveness.
So forgiveness is also symbolized by alluding to the motive of Christianity through religious diction. So since the birth of most monotheistic religions, women in literature have often been portrayed as either saint, very pure figures, or as seductious demons. So in King Lear we have both. Goneril and
No in between? No in between?
No,
saints or whores. There's nothing in between. Okay.
For most of the time.
Okay.
So yes, where was I? Okay. In King Lear we have both. Goneril and Regan, obviously representing the nepotist and angry daughters, while Cordelia is depicted almost as a reincarnation of Jesus. So throughout this extract, we notice many links between Christianity and Cordelia, who learns to pardon her father, just as Jesus teaches in the Bible. Needless to remind you that forgiveness is one of the cornerstones of Christianity. In this extract, Cordelia is said to be crying holy water from her heavenly eyes, therefore associating the symbolism of water, the pureness, and the birth to Cordelia, making her some sort of holy, almost mystical figure. So this imagery is used to glorify Cordelia's power and turning her into a mythical figure that has the power to potentially save Lear from his folly and bring the victory over to the good side against the bad. Furthermore, the gentleman refers to her passions coming over her, meaning her emotions overwhelming her. The use of the word passion is a clear reference to the passion of the Christ. So in the New Testament, the passion refers to the events leading up to Jesus' death. This foreshadows Cordelia's death, but also paints her as a savior capable of great sacrifice for those she loves. While she is portrayed as an almost godly figure, we also see a more human side of her personality. God is normally portrayed as a rational and calm figure that guides humans through life, while Cordelia, reading the letter, tries to do the same, she ends up failing and her emotions overcome her, screaming, "Sisters, sisters, shame of ladies, sisters." So through this repetition, we see that she is struggling between the nobility of rationality versus letting her feelings of despair free to honor her father. This scene also foreshadows the fighting scene between Edgar and Edmund. So there are obviously many similarities between Edgar and Cordelia, as they are both the banished children. However, Edgar's return to his father's life, even when he admits that he's back and Gloucester has not committed a tremendous error by banishing him, actually Gloucester ends up dying. So even Edgar's return could not save his father. The same can be said with Cordelia's return in her father's life. A pardon does not mean that your soul is saved. Injustice in the world of Christianity usually serves to teach a lesson, to give a moral to the story. However, this is emphasized by, notably when Kant says, "The stars above us that govern our condition," meaning the gods are always watching us. However, this does not mean that the fate that the gods have reserved for us is necessarily just. Notably, Jesus in the Bible's fate is not just, Cordelia isn't either. However, it connects to the moral story of Jesus and King Lear, meaning that you need to be inherently good without expecting something in return. In conclusion, Cordelia and Lear, we can see a clear theme of forgiveness throughout Cordelia and Lear's relationship and the reversal of power between them two, and the portrayal of Cordelia as a religious figure. In the story, both Cordelia and Lear were the victims of fate, but perhaps that the forgiveness that they had between each other gave them a little peace.
So the excerpt that Renaud and I had is scene 24, which is the last scene of the novel, the play, sorry. So our excerpt is from line 234 to line 282. So just to put you in context a bit, scene 24 is the last scene of the play, and it's also when most of the play's plot untie. So as scene 24 begins, Edmund has, on one hand, successfully manipulated both Goneril and Regan, and now that the sisters are competing for his love, their bond has started to tarnish. So on the other hand, Edmund was not successful in hiding his treason, which has now been discovered by Albany. Lastly, the confrontation between the two armies has now occurred, but France was not successful in overthrowing Goneril and Regan. So therefore, King Lear and his daughter Cordelia have been captured and imprisoned. So in our analysis of this excerpt, we are going to touch upon the themes of justice, jealousy, and repentance.
So the first main theme in the excerpt is also a more central theme to the play, which is justice. So whether it be when King Lear goes mad after banishing Cordelia, or the fact he loses his kingdom because he trusted Goneril and Regan, or also when Cornwall dies after blinding Gloucester. In this excerpt in particular, justice is illustrated through Goneril and Regan's death, which serve as justice for their actions, the punishment that they rightfully deserve for betraying their father and everyone. And it gives the audience a sense that, after all, when Cornwall dies and both Goneril and Regan die, there is a sense of justice that the bad characters, the evil ones, they're the ones who are punished and end up dying. But after everything, when Cordelia dies, the audience is left with questions about justice, whether there is really a sense of justice and if everyone really deserved their fate, because Cordelia is the more pure character of the play, the one that always truly stays on the good side, and the fact that she dies makes us question the presence of justice in the play.
So as Bruno mentioned, justice is central in the whole play, but also in our excerpt in particular. So as the play takes its course and some innocent characters, such as Gloucester, are maltreated, justice seems to be trampled, and scene 24 brings the realization that there is in fact no justice at all in King Lear, and that the characters' deaths are pretty much random. So as Gano mentioned also, the most symbolic death of all this play that shows that there is no justice is Cordelia's death, which makes Lear completely lose a small piece of sanity that he had gained back when Cordelia came back. So this can be seen through Lear's replica when he enters the stage bearing Cordelia's dead body. So he says, how, oh, you are a man of stones. Had I your tongue and eyes, I'd use them so that heaven's vault should crack. So this is a really strong replica. So here you can see that Lear has completely fallen from grace. While he used to talk in verses, he now howls like a wolf, literally. So the repetition of how brings the caricatured impression that Lear has adopted an animalistic behavior, and he has ultimately completely lost his mind. Also, he's completely shattered by the death of his daughter, and instead of realizing that he has a part, he had a part to play in this, in her death, he proceeds to blame those around him and curses them. He shouts, "A plague upon you, murderous, traitors all," and he completely avoided the fact that if he had not banished her, this would not have happened. So by blaming other people, he says, "You are men of stones." So he says that they have no emotions, while he does. And when he says that heaven's vault should crack, it brings the imagery that the gods will strike on earth and will bring back justice, because in mythology, Greek and Roman, gods would always intervene with the human justice system. So now that Cordelia is dead, Lear is completely cold to the rest of the world, which is inherently unjust for the rest of the people, because although we understand that his grief, it doesn't justify all his actions that followed Cordelia's death. So for one, when Kent returns, Lear seems to be finally accepting that he has lost his sanity, and he knows that he can't trust himself anymore. So he admits, "Mine eyes are not of the best." So it gives the idea that he cannot see truth, he cannot see reason. So he doesn't know how he should act anymore, because he knows he has made bad decisions in the past. But it also gives the impression that he has completely given up now that Cordelia is dead. So concretely, when Kent presents himself and confesses that he was acting as Caius the whole time, Lear dismisses his confession and instead replies, "I'll see that straight." So here, clearly, Lear sues addiction, as he states he will see that straight, shows his undeniable dismissal and disinterest in the matter. So while he was over-emotional and very volatile during the whole play, he's now very composed, and his reply to Kent's confession is utterly unappreciative. So this shows, again the idea of injustice, because Kent's loyalty and general benevolence is not rewarded by any recognition.
So another main theme in the play is jealousy, which is always between siblings, or whether it be between Edmund and Edgar, who, Edmund is jealous of Edgar because Edgar is treated with more respect and love, not only by his father, but by society, only because he's not a bastard like him. And Goneril and Regan are always fighting, to see who will get more power and who will actually be the ruler of England. In this script in particular, it's the resolution of this conflict, which ends with Goneril and Regan's death, because they both love Edmund. As Goneril is forced to face the consequences of her actions throughout the play, now she ends up killing herself, but the mere thought of Regan being alive and being the one that ends up with Edmund is too much for her, which is why she poisons her sister. So this is really like the big climax of this conflict, where one sister is willing to kill the other sister just because she doesn't want her to be with Edmund. Also, Albany in this scene uses the word object when he describes the scene of the two corpses lying on the ground. This also links to jealousy, because he's been betrayed by his wife Goneril, and he has a bit of he's a bit mitigated on the subject. For him, it's not a tragedy that his wife is dead, and it's more just an event, and he still pities her for what she did, but it's not something that's sad. And another theme is repentance, which is really illustrated by Edmund, who says after he realizes he's the one who ends up killing in some way both the women he loved because he couldn't choose one. He sees how evil he's been, and he says, "Some good I mean to do is part of my own nature." So here he uses the word nature, which seems to refer to not his bastardly nature, but the fact that he's inherently evil and that's the way he's always been. And then the realization of this gives him the heart to tell the others where Cordelia is, so they have a chance to save her. And so this sort of serves as a sort of repentance for him, even though he's been really the most evil character in the whole play. He can finally show a bit of heart. So in conclusion, the final scene of the play is really the one where everything comes to an end, whether it be the conflicts, and it really shows us that there is no sense of justice between the characters and throughout the play, and it allows some characters like Edmund to give back some of the to be better and die more gracefully than they would have if he hadn't come back to this less cruel side.
So it's just a Q&A amongst yourselves. Go ahead. No, the thing, because it's a Q&A amongst yourselves, then nobody has to put up their hand.
Okay. So do I just ask my question?
You just go.
Well, it has to be directed to a team, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I had a question for you guys. So very interesting point about the last point about Edmund being remorseful and all of that. Do you think that adds to the theme of injustice, meaning that he still committed these horrible acts, but now he's seeking justice? Do you think it's contradictory, or?
Do you think he's seeking justice or repentance? More like he's trying to save himself, or like trying to be more. He's trying to be a good person.
Yeah, but do you think it's fair that he does that, or like should he get justice for his actions, or should he we accept his apologies?
Oh, I think he actually does get justice for his actions, because the two person that actually, his father loved him, but in a more subtle way, I guess. But the fact that both women who loved him end up dying, that's what in the end motivates his small repentance and makes him see that he's been this horrible person and that he really shouldn't have. And that's why he kind of gives, he repents himself by saying where Cordelia is, because he knows that inherently, that when he says that his nature is, he said that his nature is evil, and he realizes that he's been a really bad person, and for him he's got injustice, and there's no way to do anything else. So yeah.
I had a question for you two, Fred, Lucy. You say that in your scene, Lear wants forgiveness for Cordelia. You were talking about how forgiveness is an important theme in your book. And I was wondering if you made anything of the fact that this scene of forgiveness and a kind of a more emotional scene immediately follows the most graphic and violent scene in the entire play, where Gloucester's eyes are getting gouged out really violently.
This scene does not directly follows this. Because
That's
between,
what you said in the
yeah, well, I like there was this scene with Albany and Gonrio and
yeah, and
like it was. I feel like it was more like like it was more interesting to like link it to those events because
Yeah,
while this was happening, Lear and Kent were going to Dover, and this is now they are in Dover. What is happening there?
Yeah, do you think that there's anything interesting about following up those two scenes together?
Well, obviously, Shakespeare obviously didn't put them side by side to just the front. I just checked, by the way, the scene right after that is actually Cordelia coming to England. But yeah, perhaps the juxtaposition of hyper intense violence with a more calm and peaceful scene probably shows, against it like accentuates the two camps in the story, really the good ones and the bad ones. Yeah.
It's like a roller coaster, right? Because you're like really, really like horrified by what is happening at the moment, and then you're feeling kind of aggrieved and saddened and like touched by.
I think that is the best image for it. Yeah, roller coaster.
So maybe it was just to make the.
I think that's kind of the intention.
Create this sort of contrast.
So if I could add something, I think also the gouging of the eyes is something very graphic that in Shakespearean time was not something, because we're used to violence right now in our generation, but they weren't used to that. And I think if it would have just kept going up from there, probably the play would not have been as accepted as much as it is now, and it wouldn't have been praised as much. So I think that yes, including that scene it was risky, but by toning it down right after with like an emotional and like innocent scene, it kind of dims it down and makes it more acceptable. And if you think.
And we do come back to violence in the end of the novel, right? When Edmund and Edgar are fighting, so it really is a cycle.
I'm not sure about your point regarding the social-cultural context of the author about violence, since, for example, executions were public and widely spread.
I meant in place because usually they do it off the stage and now they do it on stage. That's what I meant.
Yeah, that's true, but I would say that if you look at the historical context, adding violence to the play would be kind of progressive. And since violence was very more widespread, it could be acceptable more easily by an audience of these days than we would nowadays.
You have a question?
Yeah, just I like the Gloucester, the eye gouging scene. Like you said, there was an imagery where Cordelia's tears are compared to holy water.
Yeah.
Is there like a comparison to make between the holy waters that's coming from her eyes and Gloucester's eyes that are like, well, he doesn't have eyes anymore?
Well, vision seems to be not only in this piece, actually, in most of Shakespeare's work, there's like a very clear theme of vision associated with truth. So maybe the fact that she's associated with religion and crying water may be related to the truth, as Gloucester is punished for not being more truthful, but he is also for defending his ideals, right? So maybe it's a balance between them, but I think ultimately the symbolism is very close to being the same, since it's about evoking negative emotions from characters that are supposed to be the villains.
I have a question for Clément and Sia. I think Clément, you developed and you put in an oxymoron about an invasion and
yes, admirable invasion of the horde
about irony and the absurdity of life. But I was wondering.
Not the absurdity of life. The absurdity of believing in fatality.
Okay. And yeah, I was kind of wondering, is absurdity kind of like conflicting with what is at that period, like, absurdity is not very well regarded because religion is now give life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I might.
Because there's a kind of contradiction between that period of time where absurdity is not well seen, because Christianity likes to give meaning to everything.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like what I said towards the end of what I was talking about when I said that Edmund kind of went against the sort of belief of people at the time, which, as you say, they were trying to give meaning to everything, so they were giving meanings to the stars, they were giving all these symbolic meanings to all these things, and they were kind of using them as prophecy and whatever, right? And so, yeah, I think that Edmund is kind of Shakespeare's way of mocking this almost. Like, it's, well, maybe Shakespeare didn't agree with Edmund, but it's definitely Shakespeare putting in a character who disagrees with the predominating dogma and thought and doctrine of the time.
So it does emphasize his status as an outsider.
Maybe.
Yeah, but also it's quite understandable as Edmund's like a bastard, so he's not supposed to convey to social conventions. He's supposed to be like the bad guy and like the one who goes against Christianity and all this stuff. So it's quite understandable given his role in the play.
But do you still think it's Shakespeare's point of view, considering Edmund is actually the villain of the story?
I didn't say it necessarily was Shakespeare's point of view, but it's definitely like, there's a reason why Shakespeare puts in this criticism of this way of thinking, and whether it's just to make people like question it and like wonder and maybe just reinforce their belief in it, or if it's to go against that, I'd probably have to go back in time and ask Shakespeare to get an answer on that. But I think that there was a reason for to have this criticism in there.
If I can add a bit, I think Edmund is not the only character that kind of doesn't follow societal conventions. And I think for Tom, when there's the incident with the storm, when King Lear talks to nature and says nature is going against me, poor Tom is basically looking at King Lear and saying, like, nature's not doing anything, gods are not doing anything, it's all your fault. So poor Tom, if I remember correctly, doesn't believe in anything, or doesn't look like he believes in anything.
That's quite strange because at the beginning I remember Edmund was like mocking Edgar because he was looking at astrological signs. He was believing in the sky, so that's quite.
Maybe you're talking about the fool.
Maybe it's the point.
Yeah.
I have a question for you two. Do you think that the harmony between Lear and the Fool is something spontaneous from Lear, or would it be like progression in his mentality, psychological character?
I feel like the harmony between the two has been established in the previous scenes already. Like they're two different people with different points of view, but they still go along with each other really well. Like there's the level of intimacy goes to the point where the Fool calls Lear his uncle in a way. So I feel like it's not spontaneous, like where it appears where Lear suddenly becomes insane, but before he even like decided to give away his kingdom to his daughters, there was already this relationship between the two, which is established.
I feel on the other hand that Lear is a really like naive character that just makes so many spontaneous actions, like just giving away his kingdom and such, and how he just accepted Kent, the disguised Kent, into his kingdom as like a kind of servant. So I think the Fool and the King could have really just been in harmony really quickly. Met him and this guy's funny.
But kings had their jesters. Like, that was part of their, you know how he's got all his knights and stuff, but he also has a court jester. Like, it's part of that. It's part of the gig.
But it's kind of particular because normally we would expect the Fool to like be made fun of all the time.
Yes.
And not be listened. And
Yes.
do the exact opposite.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, that's like it's like the reversal.
Yeah, like duality basically.
Mhm.
Insanity and insanity.
It's the reversal. It's rather tragic.
It's the circus mirror, right? Where you're actually really thin and you look really fat. It's distorted, you know, or whatever it is.
Oh, yeah, it's a good image. No, that is a good image.
But anyways, you can see that when King Lear loses his kingdom, doesn't the roles of the Fool and the King reverse in a way? Because, well, the Fool is listened to while the King is like completely dismissed by his daughters and the dukes.
Yeah, like it's not even just the Fool. Like even Tom, who is insane, who is a madman, he's giving up advice while Lear is slowly going downhill towards insanity.
Yeah, and you have the bastards rising to the position of Earl and Theon getting his eyes gouged out. You have Kent being banished and becoming a servant. This person who was once noble being put in the stocks. So you have all these kind of like reversals of role and position happening throughout the play, and I think that kind of ties into that.
I had another question for me and Vicky, if we have the time.
Last question, yeah.
Okay. Well, you talked about the rope, the mention of the rope foreshadowing the suicide of Gloucester and of Goneril. But don't you think that it most notably foreshadows like the simile suicide of Cordelia or her murder? Because a rope is actually used for her murder instead of like being only symbolic for suicide.
Well, yeah, it could be like.
Tricky question.
No, like, I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking of an answer for that because it's a really good question. In a way, yes, because in Tom's monologue, he says that like it's the foul fiend that's driving people towards suicide and death, and this is like this can be, let's say.
The
fiend can be like
the editor, or
Edmund, like in a way, like it's not the devil himself, but more like the entity of evil, like just the evil characters are going to kill you.
That was very good. Thank you. It's tricky, eh?
Yeah.
This is very much like I don't mean to say that this is what we're doing, but it's very much like a master's level class where there are like 10 people in the class, literally 10 people in the class, and like every week it's something like this, like at an English lit level. You did really well. I know that many of you have to leave. If some people can just give me a hand and push the desks back, that would be wonderful. What I'll do is I'm going to watch this video again tomorrow, and then I'm going to finalize my my grading. Okay? Good.